Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. This is probably one of the more sobering episodes that we have ever done, will ever do, because I was sort of aware that there had been some murders that took place in senior living. But it was not until a friend sent me an article out of AARP a few months ago that I really understood that there were, as I understand it, at least 22 confirmed murders, and there's some suspicion that it may be as much as 30. We have two daughters and maybe a third of the victims who have taken what happened there and are working to make sure that it never happens again. So we're going to jump into that conversation in just a minute. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Welcome. Thank you so much for opening your hearts and sharing your stories. I want to just start with, you've all had moms who were murdered by this horrible serial murderer. I do want to say that he is in a double life prison sentence, so he won't do it again. But the question really is we want to make sure it never happens again. And that's what you guys are focused on. And so I'd like to start by just hearing the stories of your moms. Shannon, do you want to go first, since you were on first?
Well, actually, I was going to throw it to MJ. Her mom was the first in our story.
The three of us all had our mothers murdered at Tradition Prestonwood in Dallas, Texas. And my mom was the third on August 19th, 2016, the third victim at Tradition Prestonwood. And when I couldn't get a hold of my mom, I was very alerted as to why she wasn't answering the phone. And I just got very concerned and had them do a wellness check, and they went to check on her. And as I was pulling into Tradition Prestonwood and could see the reflection of the fire department and EMTs, I just knew something had happened to my mom. But before that, I mean, the night before, I had taken my mom shopping at the Galleria here in Dallas, and then to a movie. She is vibrant, live, having a drink and dinner and a movie, just had a great time. This is not assisted living. These are not nursing homes. This is independent living. And that is something that the media constantly thinks that our parents were elderly, not able to be mobile and things like that. They were vibrant women. So I had no reason to believe she had any illness whatsoever. Talked to her that morning. So when I got there and realized my mom had passed away, I obviously was so distraught and so upset. And, but there was something really odd about the situation. Some things just didn't sit right with me, like the position of her body, the reason why was the back of her hair messed up after she had her hair done. There were just a lot of suspicious little things that made me just go, wait, what happened here? What really happened here? But never, ever do you think murder. I mean, that's the worst thing that you can think of. And it never even crossed my mind. But I did think that there was something suspicious because her wedding ring was gone. And she never took a wedding ring off. She always had a ring on. And I think might have accused the paramedics. They were the only ones there at the time. And I just was just like, how did this happen? I'm in shock. Obviously, I'm grieving. I'm crying. I'm screaming. And policemen come. They move me out, and they put her upside down. I could see her. She visibly had been physically hurt. But that's how, as it was explained to me by the staff at Tradition Prestonwood, that's how people die. And I was questioning, well, really? That's how you die? Well, I don't know how people die. So I had to take their word for it. And they said she probably hid her ring in her jewelry box or something like that. We never found it, filed a report, filed a police report, filed a report with them, never heard from them. But it was a very tough thing to get over when I found her, let alone when I found out that she was actually a victim of Billy Schmiermer.
So how long did it take before you found out that she had been murdered? And talk to me about what that was like.
So it was the first year, I was with my mom 3 or 4 times a week. They knew me very well at Tradition Prestonwood. And I was grieving the first year really, really hard. I missed her so much. And then December 12th, 2018, over 2 years, I get a phone call from my attorney, Trey Crawford, and I didn't answer the phone. So I just looked at the message as I'm going to dinner, and it says, we have reason to believe there's something suspicious about your mom's death, and she might be associated with as a murder victim. Well, you get a text like that, you just start screaming. And I called him back immediately. And he went on to say that Billy Schmiermer was someone who'd been arrested, and they'd been doing some investigation tying any undetermined or any unaccompanied death with reports of jewelry missing, which all of us had. And all of us. And by the way, there were 8 victims at Tradition Prestonwood in 2016, and then another 9th in 2017. Most of them had jewelry missing, and they were all unaccompanied deaths. So when I called Trey, I basically just said, I cannot believe this. I knew something was wrong, but you never think murder. And you find out your mom dies. She's a victim of murder, a victim by a serial killer, a murder of 8 victims in one establishment, 3 in Edgemere, 7 or 8 in Preston Place, 4 more in Frisco. I mean, the news is overwhelming. And the 3 of us started talking in the very beginning and sharing our stories. I found Shannon on Yelp saying to review how beautiful Tradition Prestonwood is, but be careful if you want your parent dead there. Something to that tone. So needless to say, it was the worst day of my life.
And besides and initially the police did not see this as being suspicious. Did they do an autopsy or?
I had my mom cremated. I had no reason to believe it was anything but natural causes. My mind couldn't go there, even though there were things like her makeup was on her pillow. And I remember finding that and saying, Mom, you always took your makeup off. And I was really disappointed in her and kind of like, Mom. And, her walker was way over the side of the room. Her shoes were laid out wrong. The back of her hair was messed. I mean, there were all these signs that once I found out, it completely made sense. But I did not have an autopsy. I did talk to the medical examiner that night. I would guess that I probably gave signs that there was something off. But no, they're dismissed as elders, and they just died naturally. So no one looked into it.
It breaks my heart. It pisses me off. And this is real ageism. There's a lot of conversation inside the industry about ageism based on language that frankly, I find to be superficial nonsense. It's the behavior stuff that's really critical. So where do we go next, Shannon? Who else?
Well,
you're muted there. Okay. You?
hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My name's Ellen, and my mother was and she lived in the same building as many of the others. And she was healthy and vibrant, sharp as a tack, and felt safe where she lived. She had been visiting me for several weeks in Indiana, as she did frequently, and she went back home because she had some things to do and wanted to go to the Texas OU game, and ended up not going, which was not a great decision. But that morning had said she was not going to go. Well, we knew she wasn't going to go, but she was going to watch it. She was going to go down and get a salad and come back up and watch the game. And my sister and I both talked to her several times a day, every day. And that evening, my sister called me and said, I can't get a hold of Mother. And she said, will you try her? And I said, yes. So I called her cell phone a couple times, called her landline, left a message on her machine, Mother, pick up the phone. And then I had her Apple ID for her iPad in case it was ever lost, we could find it. And so I pinged her, and it drove her crazy whenever I did that. And I pinged her several times, and it showed on my end that it was, actually playing the sound. And I call my sister back. I go, okay, that's so strange. We got a problem or something. So my sister called the concierge and said, would you do a wellness check on my mom? And eventually they did. And she called my sister back and said, can you get over here? And so my sister called my brother. They immediately went over there. They got there to an ambulance outside and to the building manager. His title's not really that, but and my sister knew something was wrong, and he just said, your mom has passed away. So as they walked upstairs, the paramedics were walking down the hallway, and they had already been in a room and verified that she had just been deceased. She had donated her body to UT Southwestern, so we had to wait several hours for them. But I was on the phone with my sister the whole time, and my brother and my brother-in-law were there, and they were upset. I was upset, and the building manager, community relations director is what he's called, and he said, oh, she was not in any pain. He said she just died instantly before she hit the ground. She was face first, nose in the carpet. And he said, when someone dies and they're still living, they turn to the left or they turn to the right for air. And she just died before she hit the ground, putting thoughts in her head. So that when the police got there, they had asked me her medication she was on and what I wanted them to write down as the diagnosis or how she died. And I said, well, I don't know, heart attack, stroke. And so they did, and they left. And then the building communication director stayed with my brother and sister the whole time, which I think he did with a lot of the other victims. My mom was number 6, if I didn't say that. And so then they waited for UT Southwestern to come. And while we were all talking on the phone, I said, you guys have to take a picture of her. I had to see her body, right, for closure and to know that this really had happened. And they're like, okay. So they took a couple pictures, sent them to me. Well, they sent them to my husband, and then he showed them to me. And I just couldn't believe it. Unbelievable. So anyway, so when UT Southwestern came to pick her up, I said, make sure her jewelry's off. And Laurie said, she does. My sister said, she should have her ring on. And I said, she has to, because she couldn't get it off. When she had been here, we were going to clean our rings after cooking. And she's like, I can't get it off anymore. It won't even go over my knuckle. And I said, oh, okay, whatever. And we'll just clean them another way. So it's interesting that happened when she was here, that I knew she couldn't get a ring off. So then she didn't have earrings on, and she'd gone to the bank the day before, and taken out $600 just to have cash. And she had a couple dollars in her wallet. We didn't realize that until later. Anyway, UT Southwestern came and took her, and I was asking the communications director, this ring, what's going on? He said, oh, well, check her panty drawers. These old women hide their stuff in panty drawers. And I'm thinking, that is the strangest thing to say. And my brother, of course, thought the same thing. So as time went on, we were like, okay, he had to take the ring. I mean, that's just weird. But anyway, so, I mean, that's basically how we found her. And I did not suspect her.
How did you discover that it was murder rather than natural causes?
So in our case, kind of a long story, I won't get into it, but my sister, it's a fluke. She was having lunch with a close friend who was a neighbor to Rosemary Curtis, who was murdered later in a residence. And her neighbor had seen the fire trucks and whatnot come. And she was also watching out for Rosemary, because Rosemary lived alone. And so she was telling my sister about, firemen and what had happened, and that she'd seen this man come out of her house, and that talking to investigators, that there was a serial killer that they were investigating for a lot of deaths. And my sister just thought that was really strange and told her friend, or a friend already knew the story, and called, I'm rambling, anyway, called Detective Tabor, and he told my sister, he said, oh, I was just getting ready to call you. Your mother, Norma Wilson French? Yes. He said, she's one of the top people we're investigating for murder.
Wow.
Then my sister called me, and I was just in utter shock. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah. I just can't hardly imagine. I've got so many things I want to ask, but Shannon, I want to get to your story first, and then I've got some questions. I want to sort of dig a little deeper into this, because again, my goal, my audience are people who own and operate senior living communities. I want to, there's some hard stuff they need to hear, and nobody better to talk about those things. But Shannon, let's start with let's go to your story next.
Well, thank you, Steve. You've heard two stories from what I now call my sisters. My story is so similar. I went to pick my mother up for church. She wasn't waiting for me. I went up, found her body, thought everything for 1 hour was normal. When the funeral home came for her body, I discovered a piece of jewelry was missing. And that's what triggered everything. So at that point, I knew that my mother had some horrible experience within an hour of finding her. The police came, they did some checking, talked to some people, and I was told at the end of that Sunday afternoon that my mother had died naturally and someone had just come by and robbed her. What I didn't know was that MJ and Ellen's mother had been before my mother. MJ's mother in August, Ellen's mother 3 weeks before my mother. There's a trend there, but nobody was talking about it, and somehow the police missed that. So my information led me to doing an open records research on the property, where I discovered there had been 4 unattended deaths that I could see with layman's eyes based on these police reports. And unattended deaths with robberies, a trespasser had been reported. I attempted to draw attention to the security concern, didn't get any reaction. As MJ noted, I put out a Yelp review in March of 2017, and sadly, no one paid any attention even to that, and there was another victim in December of 2017. And at that point, just had felt like I had done all that I could, upset about the strange situation of my mother's passing, but had to go on until, just like the other ladies, July of 2018, I had a phone call from a detective that my mother's case was being examined as a homicide. And that is a very, very unique experience. You know, we find our mothers, they're deceased. We find our mothers, they're deceased and they've been robbed. And then years later, we're told that our mothers were murdered. And with that unique experience, we were fortunate enough to find each other and come together to form a nonprofit that's called Secure Our Senior Safety, SOSS. And the way that we are healing is by working so other families would never ever have this come up in their lives. Our goal is to improve security in senior independent living properties.
So you are currently working on some legislation with you proposed some legislation with the state of Texas. Can you walk us through a little bit what you're proposing?
Sure. So what we learned, the Texas legislature meets every other year for 5 months. It's a very quick process to get bills through. And we went last session, we were able to get 2 bills through. One of our family members learned on Facebook Messenger because no one notified her that her mother had been, her death certificate had been amended. We have now corrected that. And we increased the spot checks on Cash for Gold shops, as that is where the murderers sold our mother's jewelry. This session, we are back and we have what we consider 5 very simple, common sense issues, concerns. One is that background checks are done on employees at properties. 2 is that when visitors come, they sign in and register and wear a name ID. This offender wandered the properties time after time for hours, not identified, just assumed that it was all right for him to be there. We want to change that. We want properties to share with the residents what criminal activity is going on. If my mother or Ellen's mother or MJ's mother had known that there had been unattended deaths with robberies, that there had been a trespasser on the property, they would have known not to open their door unless they were expecting someone. So it's like a neighborhood crime watch equivalent. We also want law enforcement to be permitted to speak with residents. Since the properties are privately owned, the management can determine whether the police officers, the detectives, have access. In our situation, when they went to investigate, a detective was walked off the property and told not to return unless he had subpoenas and warrants. Another detective, when he asked to speak with residents, was told he couldn't and was not able to leave his contact information if a resident wanted to speak with him. And then the 5th thing that we're working on is a legal situation. Our mother's leases had a forced arbitration clause, and it was binding their agents, aka us. And MJ is in this situation. We believe that a family, when there is a terrible personal injury case, should be able to take the property to court and sue. Arbitration is appropriate for rent disputes, noise violations, but not when there's personal injury or certainly homicide. So those are the points that we have worked into a bill that is now it's been assigned to committees in our State House and Senate.
So I'm assuming that the last one that you mentioned, the arbitration, is probably going to be the one that you're going to get the most pushback on. Is that true, or?
Actually, we are making some ground with that. We can get pushback on anything, but we are feeling a little more confident that may not cause as much trouble as we at first were concerned about.
Terrific. Jada, why don't you put us all 4 on for just for the rest of the time? I'd actually like to ask a series of questions. So the conversation has been mostly about jewelry. What about money and other things? Is it just because it's hard to know what was there?
Well, in my situation, I knew I'd taken my mother to the bank Friday afternoon. I knew exactly how much money she had withdrawn, and that money was missing. So yes, it was jewelry and cash, I think, in all of our cases.
Yeah. And is this guy, so tell me a little bit about this guy. He wasn't an employee, right?
Correct. not an employee.
So how did you any idea how he got onto this scheme?
I don't know any of us really know when it started. I have reason to believe it started years ago. Probably there are a lot more victims that are unknown. I think the police, both in Plano and Dallas, stopped investigating. It was said to me by someone at the Dallas courts that why, after seeing all the pain that you guys have gone through, why dig up cases in 2015, 14, 13 and see the victim's family go through the pain that you're going through as well?
So do you have a
Steve,
sense? Yes.
Part of the answer to your question is he just walked on the properties. In my mother's case, we can find from Google data that he entered at 10 a.m. He wandered the property for 3 hours, and then he stopped my mother while she was eating lunch in the dining room. And then he was at her apartment at 1. He exited at 2. He just walked in. And it was four total properties, independent living properties in Collin and Dallas County.
And
I also want to add, though, that he also worked for a lot of private families. And one of our partners on Secure Our Seniors Safety is the McPhees. And Billy Shamir worked for a home health care company that he signed up with as an alias, and they did not do any background checks with. And several months after their father had passed away, he came back and robbed their mother of her jewelry and murdered her as well. So, in our particular cases, he just walked in off the property, but there are other cases where he actually worked for the family.
So this could have potentially gone back years and years and years, right? And you just simply no way really to know how many, because it seemed like somebody said that they thought there might be as many as 30 victims. Is that correct?
At least.
Yeah. So, given my audience, what is it you want to say to senior living operators to make sure this doesn't happen again? I mean, yeah, I'm sure you're all pretty pissed off and I would be, so I'm not blaming you. I think it's the right emotion. But what is video cameras, you talked about sign in. Well,
Steve, I'm just going to jump in real quick.
Yes.
I moved my mom into Tradition Prestonwood because they advertised heavily about the most important things as seniors living in independent living is one of the things is safety and security. And if you read their websites, you see surveillance, cameras, security. They make it sound like it is 100% tied up. And I trusted them. So one thing I would say is anytime you move a parent into independent living is that you make sure that the establishment shows you where that security is and how they operate that security.
They needed to have cameras in the hallways. And I had an investigator tell me early on that they thought maybe he had gotten someone's key fob early on, one of the earlier deaths, and was just using that to get in and out. But he had also said that they had video of him in the garage, which he shouldn't have been in the garage. It was easy to get into, though, obviously. And he was on the telephone or pretending like he was on the telephone. And a couple walked up to the door and key fobbed it open. And he held the door open for them and followed him in. And, they have cameras of him coming, going in and out.
So that's to me almost more scary, right? So they had cameras and yet it didn't get picked up on. And so I find myself thinking that the reality is that senior living operators need to be talking about seeing strangers in their buildings. Since we first started talking, I've spent so much time thinking about what this means and what this means to the industry. And, you know, and I recognize that someplace even like Disneyland, where they've got their own police force, occasionally there are people who manage to slip back through and get inside. So you can't make it 100%. But in a senior living community, if everybody says, you know, if the operation, the teaching, the talking, the culture is to challenge people who don't have name badges or who you don't recognize, think of all the lives that could be saved in the future. Over the last few months, I've been in a number of buildings, including staying overnight. And in every case, I've had name badges, but a couple places where I've been for more than one night, the name badge lost its stickiness. And so I found that I was wandering around, and I don't think anybody ever challenged me. Now, I will say that I'm tall and I'm bald and I'm recognizable. And so people have probably seen me around, but I just think this is so important. I find myself wondering how easy, if I went to my neighborhood communities, how easy it would be to walk in and wander the halls. So it's really hard. Any other words of advice? We're sort of coming up on the end of time here, but any other things? So sort of two things. Any other advice for operators is the first thing, and the second thing is how can people help support what you're doing?
I'd like to say I think it's very important that they disclose the information that they have to other residents, even if they had said, you know, we possibly have a stranger wandering in the building. My mother would have never been in the hallway by herself. Yep. And, you know, their view, I believe, I've been told that is they didn't want to open up a can of worms. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a quote. So,
yeah. Yeah.
And we would love to have your audience subscribe and get our newsletter. We have a website, www.secureourseniors.org. I think I just saw it pop up. And you can go on there. You can see more about our story. You can read about our moms. And we would love for you to, again, go wiggle your way and subscribe to receive our newsletter, get the updates of our work in Austin, and support us if you can in our upcoming golf tournament in October.
Yeah. And I think I so appreciate your courage, your willingness to tell the story. It's such an important story. My mission to those of you who are in our industry is that we simply have to do better than this. Particularly as there were multiple incidents, it's clear to me that community leadership of these organizations just didn't want to talk about it because it was too ugly. And these are really, really important things. And honestly, I believe that it cost people's lives that didn't, maybe you might even argue that the first deaths would have been very difficult to prevent, but the number is just, it really is shocking. And somebody needs to go write a book about this. This really ought to be a book. One question for you that I didn't ask is, what finally triggered somebody realizing that there was a problem that needed to be investigated?
There was a survivor. It was the grace of God. Mary Bartell was attacked and she survived. And the police, when they first investigated, told the family, "Oh, we think your mother hit her head and she's confused. She's talking about somebody coming and putting a pillow over her and smothering her." And thankfully, the family pursued and got a detective to listen to Mrs. Bartell, and that's what cracked the case. She is our hero.
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to say that I think that this is a horrific example of ageism, because certainly the senior living communities had things that they should have done that they didn't do, but the police, the district attorney's office, the coroner's office, because they were just old ladies, right?
Correct.
And that's really shocking. It is really shocking that was the approach. These are people who were, we're supposed to be protecting as a society, and we don't. So again, thank you so much for for joining me here, for sharing, for pressing to make this better. And we're going to continue telling the story and talking about it and pushing the industry to do a better job in keeping our residents safe.
Thank you, Steve.
so
Thank you,
much for
Steve.
having us.
Yes, appreciate it.